And here for a closer look at the surge in support for mass deportations is Mike Leon, NTD News contributor and policy and strategy director at the Free and Equal Elections Foundation. Mike, is the result of this Axios poll surprising to you?
Hey, Chris, good to see you first and foremost, but I haven't seen you in a while. Yeah, it's a little surprising to me because if you think about it, and the one thing is so funny, I was talking about polling recently on an episode of ours about the first thing I always look at with polling is the sample size. This is 6,200 plus folks that were sampled across different age ranges. So you had boomers, you had Gen Z, you had Gen X, you had Republicans, independents, Democrats, you had whites, Latinos, and blacks that were surveyed as a part of this. And the fact that you have an increase on the Democratic side, 46%, like you said, on the Republican side that are in favor of ending birthright citizenship, I think says to me, and the pollsters also said this, and they echoed this in the poll, was that it signals to President Biden that there is something that needs to be done about what is happening at our U.S. southern border. And it's not just now the polling, it's also the agencies that are working across the border. It's local law enforcement in these towns. It's the mayor of these border towns in El Paso and Eagle Pass, et cetera. Everyone is saying it. And this executive action that he promised in that Univision Televisa interview a couple weeks back that he said would happen by the end of April hasn't happened yet. So I think this poll is really surprising. And I think that it should land on the desk of whoever's in the president's ear right now.
Now, I want to talk about independence in all of this. Axios is saying nearly 2/3 of Americans believe this illegal immigration is a real crisis and not just a political, fictitious narrative. How big of a role do you expect this issue to play in the general election for that independent group?
Yeah, so, we've seen a lot of exit polling across the caucuses and primaries that have pointed to immigration as the number one cause, right? And everyone's going to try to analyze the independent vote. I mean, we were overanalyzing it in the caucuses and primaries because we thought independents, especially in states that were open primaries, would vote for someone like a Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis. It ended up not happening. So now what we're seeing is here's a key central issue, immigration, economy, obviously, and then whatever other issues, foreign policy, any other domestic issues that come after. How will this play with independents? Because this is the swath of folks that need to turn out for both former President Trump and current President Biden if they want to win this election. I think the biggest thing I've always pointed to, Chris, is voter apathy. In 2016, we've got low voter turnout, 127 or so million people voted. In 2020, we got almost 156 million people that went out to the ballot box to vote in the presidential election. Neither of these candidates can afford for the independent vote to stay home. And so from an immigration standpoint, I think that poll really points to that President Trump is starting to gain inroads in terms of what independent voters are feeling about the wave of immigration that's happening and the current Biden administration's mishandling of what's happening at the border.
Now, this poll we're talking about also says that Americans believe the Biden administration is the number one cause for the border crisis. How big of a hurdle is this issue for President Biden in this election cycle?
Yeah, that's a great question. Look, I've spoken to folks in the Biden campaign. Obviously I'm Latino. You can't get away with it with this face, Chris. And so this is a central issue for the Biden campaign, right? I think the biggest thing right now, and having spoken to folks on the ground in El Paso, in Eagle Pass, from reporters, I've spoken to folks on the Mexican side of the border as well. All of them have said that the Biden administration needs to take this serious, right? And you're seeing as the images that are playing with me right now in the package are of him down there at the border. It's been overwhelming for any administration if you think about it. And this is the thing that's been echoed to me from folks on the ground. It's that the Obama administration failed at this. The Trump administration had and I hate to say it like this, the luxury of a global pandemic where they could use a policy that was in direct conflict with what CDC guidelines were saying. So you could have a Remain in Mexico policy and you could limit the amount of folks that were coming into the border because it was a public health crisis. Now we're kind of past that, and the Biden administration really hasn't done anything from a legislative standpoint. We know why. We've talked about it on this show specifically about different issues and legislative things that have not even come to the floor for votes in the House and Senate. So now folks are pointing to that inaction to the Biden administration. This is coming home to roost for him. Listen, there's only 6 months left until the election, and the president's going to have to go out there and campaign on this.
All right, Mike Leon, NTD News contributor and policy and strategy director at the Free and Equal Elections Foundation. Good to see you. Thank you for your insight as always.
Thanks for having me, Chris.